Everybody, it is episode 150 of Recotopia. I'm Chris Atkinson, joined by Aaron Dicer, who was bringing up the images today. I don't even know what that was. It looked like a hubcap or something. I don't know.
It's a Borderlands steelbook. That's what that was.
Oh, it's a Borderlands steelbook. Okay. I see.
Because that's what you need in your life is the Borderlands steelbook.
Hey, I've got one. Can you imagine? Like, hey, what would be the odds of 2 or 3 of us having a Borderlands steelbook?
It'd be amazing.
And the odds yet. All right, and we're joined by Aaron Dicer, and we're also joined by Jeremy Scott.
Hello, everybody.
I don't know what happened to my screen.
Oh yeah, you froze.
Your screen was freezing because I didn't get a chance to say "Hidely ho, Philip C. Morinos." That's why that froze.
Wait till I get this back up. I'm sorry, folks. Let's see what's happening with that. The browser went down.
Oh no!
And then my webcam went down. But you can hear me, right?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Wow.
Very interesting. I wonder if I should just do it this way. Let's see if there's a way to get this up.
Then I won't be able to see you smirk when I make jokes.
You can also, it's my Transformers 1 steelbook as well.
I got to see that movie.
Oh man, I don't have to exit out of here to get the webcam working, do I?
You might. I'm trying to think if there's a different way to go into settings. If you click settings down below and like select a different camera and then reselect it, maybe it'll pop it on. I'm not sure.
Let's see.
James Kinder says, I can deal with omniscient Chris.
Well, my
speaking
webcam
from the beyond.
It's not doing anything though. Okay. Should I exit out and then go back in?
Just pop back in and see if we got you.
Let's see. All
right, now we got to talk shit about him.
All right.
Because he won't find out about it until
never. There's no one who would know or let him know all the terrible things that we would be saying about him.
Oh man, what's funny is right before the reason I was a couple minutes late to join you early for the pre-show was because my audition was saying,
right.
"Hey, there he is.
Hey, he's here."
No.
Never mind. I'll finish that story later.
All right. Now I'm back, and I've introduced everybody, and now I need to welcome chat to the proceedings, and welcome chat. And they have blamed Ian, which is correct.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's go on to our small. Actually, our big recommend today is Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. Can't wait to get into that. And let's get into our small recommends. Jeremy, kick us off.
Yes, sir. I love when I'm flipping through this is probably the only reason I keep the movie channels in cable. I love flipping through the guide, finding a movie I've never heard of with an actor I know and watching it and finding it to be great. So that happened this week with a 2024 movie called A Different Man starring Sebastian Stan. This movie fucked me up. And I mean that in the best way possible. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the plot just because I look at how boring that image is. I need to tell you what's going on in this movie so that you'll be interested to watch it. Sebastian Stan is playing a wannabe actor with a condition called neurofibromatosis. This is what they wrongly thought the Elephant Man had. It makes his face look really disfigured, puffy and melty. And he's a struggling actor. He's got a neighbor who's a wannabe playwright, and he's in love with her. Her name's Ingrid, but he can't tell her he's in love with her because he's too self-conscious. And so he undergoes an experimental procedure to cure this condition. This is the science fiction part of the movie. And it works. Now he looks like Sebastian Stan. And so he tells everybody that Edward himself killed himself and that Guy, is the new guy living in the apartment. And then we cut forward several years, and he's a successful real estate agent, and he finds that his neighbor, Ingrid, the wannabe playwright, has written a play about the disfigured Edward that she knew as her neighbor. And he goes to audition for the play, but he's terrible. Then he finds a mask his doctor gave him that looks like the disfigured face he used to have that he wore in therapy. And he puts that on and goes to audition, and he's amazing. Gets the role of playing himself. And now here's where the movie really gets weird. Oswald, a guy you've never met, shows up, and this guy has neurofibromatosis. And this is played by an actor who really has that condition. And Oswald is charming as fuck. He is just a swinging dick. He has no qualms about saying what he thinks. He charms everyone. He's everything that Edward could not be when Edward had this condition. So much so that he ends up stealing the role in the play from Edward. And that's all I'm going to tell you. But this movie has so much to say about identity and masks and who we become when we can hide and who we become when we can't. And it lingered with me for hours. And I just had to share with everybody this film. I was looking for it on best top 10 lists of the year. I only found it on one, but I loved it. It's immediately in my top 10 of the year.
This is super intriguing. I'm going to watch this now.
Yeah,
it's good. It's great. Everything you said is true. The actor Adam Pearson, who has the real condition, really I think is the central crux of how this works when you start to process that this isn't just some sort of Hollywood, fiction idea, but here's a real person that the story, though not a true story, comes a lot from his experiences or things that he's dealt with. And the idea of, it's hard to put the right English words on it, but people use words like self-esteem or self-confidence or, whatever, but how much just being in it, having acceptance of yourself with all of its features, just the fact that we would call them negative or positive says something about us, but of all of our features, just the way we look, what our body looks like, what our face looks like, whatever, and how there's an interesting thing that can happen with that confidence or acceptance that is so much more beautiful than any cultural norm could ever achieve, right? And so the movie really dives into that stuff well. So I think Sebastian Stan is proving himself to want to take some really interesting choices after the MCU, and I really like it. The Apprentice movie he's made is another really interesting choice of his that I think he does really good work in. And I think this performance should have been his performance that was elevated this year over the one in The Apprentice, but I'm glad he's getting some attention for his work this year because he did some good stuff.
Yeah.
Aaron, what do you got?
I wanted to talk about Steven Soderbergh's Presence as my small recommend. Man, I've always enjoyed Soderbergh movies. Clearly, Ocean's 11 is one of my favorite movies of all time. And there are others that he has done that I would put in that category of all-timers. Even Sex, Lies, and Videotape, his kind of debut into the world of independent film and all that is a pretty astonishing first-time thing for a director. But man, his recent, since he unretired, so to speak, I just think it's getting buried, and I'm not sure why, because he continues to make interesting filmography choices when a lot of directors are taking big paychecks and doing MCU or, whatever. He's just pumping out one or two movies a year, and they're always interesting. They're always very story-focused, character-focused, and he's making interesting editing choices in all of them. And I've just fallen in an even deeper love with him with his recent choices, and Presence continues that trend. I thought it was beautiful. It has so much to say about family relationships and how we have individual narratives within our community, specifically a family community in this instance, that we don't even realize the completeness of the worlds of the people that we spend, all of our time with. And this is an interesting conceit in that I don't think I'm giving too much away. It's right from the beginning. It's pretty easily understood. This is from the POV of a presence in the house. It's called a ghost or, whatever you want. So the entire movie takes place from the point of view of this presence and what they're experiencing with this family, what they're trying to communicate to this family. And I think it's good start to finish for me. I love the way it ends. It also has some sci-fi elements to it that I'm still thinking about and still processing. I thought the performances were great. Lucy Liu's great. Chris Sullivan is great in this, who you may know from the TV show about the family.
The TV show about the family.
Yeah, you know that one TV
Family
show,
Ties, Family Matters,
about the family. The recent one about the 3 siblings that were all turning 30 during the pilot. And anyways, he's on that show. This Is Us. This Is Us.
I was about to say it ends with us.
How do you have 3 siblings all turning 30 at the same time? Are they all
watch the show, Jeremy? Watch the show, and maybe you'll have your answer. They 2 of them are twins, and the third was adopted from the birth unit that their twins were in when the parents didn't show up. So they were all born on the same day.
So you give birth to twins, and then somebody's like, "Oh, we don't want our baby," and you're like, "Well, we already have 2. We'll take a third."
Yeah.
Jesus.
Anyhow, Presence is great, guys. Presence is great.
I will eventually see this. I love Soderbergh too. It's amazing. Ever since Behind the Candelabra, when he said he was not doing movies anymore, he's made 15 cents.
Yeah.
So, so it's it just goes to show you can say you're going to retire all you want, but when you're like sitting there for a week doing nothing, you're just like, but I like making movies. Let's do this. And
so it's like these are, in my opinion, these are all good to great movies. High Flying Bird, The Laundromat, Let Them All Talk, No Sudden Move, and Kimmy. And that's just within the last 4 years. Like it's I don't know. I'm just so impressed by the way he's able to just crank out great stories.
Did he direct all those, or are those all are those producer?
He directed all those, I think.
He directed all of them?
I believe so. Yeah,
I haven't even heard of most of those, just so you know.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
That's why I was wondering if some of those were producer credits. But if he I wouldn't be surprised. There was a show he was on that he did like all the episodes. Yeah, he did all the episodes of
that. Was during his retirement. He did the Nick on TV. Yeah,
yeah. So. Guy,
which is an incredible show, by the way. So
yeah, I've heard. I want to see it. I actually saw a breakdown of the Nick a week or so ago. I'm like, oh, I need to watch that.
Yeah.
All right. I have another movie that has a similar kind of perspective, like Aaron is talking about here. I think the way you described it here, like Nickel Boys has this unique perspective of 2 people where you see it from their POV, their literal POV throughout the whole movie, meaning you don't see them in the shot and you just see where they go and what their eyes see all the way throughout. And it takes a second to get into when it starts, because it's like, what's actually going on? And they're kind of like advancing the story through some very subtle things. It takes a while to get to what the story is about. But it mainly follows this one guy, Elwood, for a bit, and he gets arrested in Florida, and he's taken to this jail, but it's a school. Maybe it's a really, really loose version of a school where I guess they're supposed to rehabilitate the people that are in there or whatever. Of course, he gets arrested for some bullshit. This is the 60s, and Elwood is black, and he runs into another a friend named Turner who's black, and there's a segregated section of this jail where it's all black people, and then there's also white people, and of course the white people are treated very much differently in this school. And you realize very early on that punishments for the black people in this school are very harsh, and they're very hard to even hear about, much less see later on in the movie. What the movie does is it focuses on these 2 friends and and how they deal with being in this place called Nickel Academy. And you get peeks into the future where we are given the behind the head perspective of Elwood as he is going through, and he's apparently has become like a boss at a moving company or something like that. And we are seeing him research things into the school some 20, 30 years later or whatever. And of course, his research into the school, the news stories that are coming out are atrocities that were committed at the school. So the movie just keeps kind of going back and forth between this, and you have this realization as you're watching it that one of these kids may not make it out of the school by the end of it. And so I will leave it at that. It is one of those very harrowing race stories that I think has a very unique perspective. And probably this movie should have gotten a lot more nominations considering the Amelia Perez's of the world. Ramel Ross is the writer director on this. And I believe this was based on a true story. And there's even a sort of a mention though that there were a lot of these type of places back in the 60s that people were sent to. It is harrowing, and it has a lot of stuff in it that's going to depress the shit out of you, but it is a well worth it movie to watch. I would highly recommend Nickel Boy.
I highly recommend it as well. It is in my top 5 of the year. It is just the way. So there are many times when a awards baity type movie, I'll go, okay, I see the artistic choices you're making, but they feel like you're just making them because they're artistic choices, whether it be an aspect ratio or black and white or whatever it might be, and you can throw around words like pretentious or, whatever. This movie's, the way it uses perspective in this movie is such a specific story and thematic choice. And the way it changes perspective throughout the movie is such a specific story and thematic choice. I loved it. It gives you exactly the emotional stakes that you need to understand the depth of this story. And I don't want to go into too much more detail because I don't want to spoil those moments for anybody, but there's some really, really great artistic choices in this movie that just make it next level.
I basically went into this with no idea, really. I just heard some good things about it, and that's it. And again, highly recommend this. There you go. Let's go to our big recommend. It's Jeremy's, and it's Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. And Jeremy, take it away.
All right, everybody. Before the Devil Knows You're Dead does come from the famous Irish phrase that may you be in heaven for half an hour before the devil knows you're dead, as Paul Newman says in Road to Perdition. We open, as all good movies do, on a sex scene, as Philip Seymour Hoffman has sex with Marissa Tomei, who is not Aunt May, but he is also having sex with his own reflection. Afterwards, he jokes about how they're suddenly an old married couple. They kind of seem happy. They talk about Brazil, but there are hints that not everything is rosy in this relationship, and she's looking for more, something more. Then we get to the title card and cut straight to the day of the robbery. And this movie is going to jump back and forth in time in an effort to make you dizzy. We see the family matriarch, Rosemary Harris, who is not Aunt May, dropped off at a jewelry store. A man in a mask with a gun comes in and robs the store. While robbing the diamonds, he continues to point the gun at her and order her around. But eventually, he's distracted enough. She grabs a gun from the open drawer and shoots him. He shoots back at her. As he stumbles out of the store, she shoots him again. And then we cut to getaway driver Ethan Hawke, who was actually the star of a completely separate movie called Getaway, panic and drive erratically out of the parking lot. Next, we cut to a youth girls baseball, softball type game, and we see Hoffman's character, who is Andy, and Hawke's character, who is Hank, before Hank takes his daughter home to his ex-wife's apartment, where she chides him for literally everything, though I kind of get the feeling he deserves it. She asks about what he fed the daughter, about sunblock, and about the money he owes her. Hank then meets up at a bar with Andy, and we find out that they are brothers. Andy immediately pitches Hank on a heist, but won't tell Hank anymore until Hank commits to the heist. We do not see that happen. Instead, we see Hank leaving work, presumably the next day, to go have sex with Gina, Andy's wife. I'd love to see the origins of either of those relationships, because neither of them really makes a lot of sense to me. But anyway, next we see Hank nervously watching his daughter in a school play and cheering for her. Then after the play, she asks him to pay for a school trip to something called The Lion King, which I presume is a Broadway show of some acclaim, because she really wants to go. He agrees, but we can see in his eyes that even the $130 for this trip is going to be hard for him to come up with. The next day, I presume, because this movie doesn't really tell you a lot in terms of how much time takes place, Hank calls Andy from down the hall by the coffee, and Andy says, come to my office, and I guess they work together. The movie doesn't really give us much more than that. In this scene, Hank agrees to the heist, and then Andy makes him agree again while showing he's not crossing his fingers, because we're children. Here's where we learn that it's their parents' jewelry store that Andy intends to rob. They both used to work there. They know the security codes. They know the safe combination. They know where everything is. And hey, business owners, change your safe combinations every, I don't know, time somebody quits, maybe? Hank doesn't think he can do the robbery, but Andy tells him they both need money, and this solves everything for both of them. He gives him $2,000 in cash and says, see how far just that much goes for you, then imagine the rest. Hank immediately goes and pays some of the money to his ex. Then, on a solid run of stupid decisions, he goes to see an acquaintance at a bar and pitches him on doing the jewelry store robbery together. Time is really moving at an ambiguous pace, but I think a day or two later, Hank picks up the friend, whose name is Bobby, who needs to smoke some weed before they go for the heist. Then in the car, Bobby laughs after Hank puts on a ridiculous-looking disguise, and then decides that Hank isn't cut out for this, and Bobby, is going to do the thing, and he flashes a gun. While they wait for the employee to come open the store, Bobby puts in some pump-up music. Then a UPS truck and an employee partially block Hank's view so that he can't see it's his own mother opening the store and not the expected employee. He also doesn't recognize the car. We can talk about that later. I've got my theories. We see Bobby go in, but we keep on Hank's perspective this time throughout the robbery. He hears the gunshots. He sees Bobby shot coming out of the store, and he leaves in a panic. He goes to a dingy bathroom to wash his face, and then he calls Andy and tells him it all came apart. And then we cut back to 4 days earlier as Andy is on the phone in his office. He then does some blow, and now we know why Andy needs money. Then he goes to a meeting to learn that the company is being audited, and his department, payroll, is up first on Monday. And by the look on Andy's face, I think we have an even better understanding about why he is in desperate need of money. He then grabs some cash and goes to the skyscraper of sin, visiting an apartment where an armed man in a kimono answers the door, and where Andy gets drugs shot into him by that man, who is some kind of a professional needle person. He pours himself a drink, makes himself absolutely at home while undressing, ends up in the back room on a bed, and kimono guy comes in and administers the drugs. And when he grabs the drugs and puts the money in the safe, we see probably more money and value than they are going to try and steal from the jewelry store. Now, I'm not a drug knower. Okay, I know one drug, but I think this is heroin that's being administered to Andy. But I don't think it's super important what the drug is. Sometime later, we see him relaxing in the living room, rambling to himself about real estate economics and how everything adds up on the spreadsheet, but in his life, the parts do not add up to one me. To which kimono guy says, get a shrink or a wife. We cut to a post-sex bed of Andy and Gina, as Gina says she's a lousy cook and a lousy lay, and she doesn't know why Andy keeps her around, and I'm confused, but I'm going to go with it. He says, what if I could get us back to Rio to live? And she starts scoffing and nitpicking his ability to do so. During this conversation, he mentions he's pulling down 6 figures, which that dude is spending a ton of money on drugs if he still needs money somehow. Gina mentions that she knows there's no extradition between Brazil and the U.S., and now we think we know why Andy is talking about Rio again. Andy then visits a pretty shady-looking diamond appraiser / fence and gives him a diamond and his card and leaves. Then he goes to give Hank the $2,000 from earlier. Then we see him giving Hank the $2,000 from earlier, but this time the scene continues. Hank says, how do we start? And Andy says, you're the one doing the heist, buddy, because of this big real estate deal that is probably fictional. I would be recognized if I was doing the heist, so I can't risk it. Has to be you. Then he bullies Hank, calling him a baby. And then he starts complimenting and building Hank back up. And this is sort of abusive behavior, but you get the sense that this has been their relationship for maybe most of their lives. Also, side note, Andy is an asshole. I do love when he gets right up into Ethan Hawke's face, and you can see Hoffman's eyes darting back and forth from Ethan Hawke's eyes. You can see Hoffman's eyes. Sorry, I'm getting everybody confused here. Hawk and Hank and Andy. We again see the call when Hank calls Andy to say the robbery went bad, and then we cut to the hospital where both men show up and realize it was their mother in the jewelry store during the robbery who was shot. And as their father tries to explain what happened, we cut back to the father's perspective prior to the robbery. This is Albert Finney, and his name is Charles, and his wife, Nanette, is telling him she has to go to work at the jewelry store because Doris, the normal employee, has to babysit and can't come in until noon. He says he'll drop her off and pick her back up after his driving test. And no, the movie does not explain why Hank didn't recognize his father's car. I guess it's implied maybe the sons don't visit very often. I'm a little confused about that car. We can get into it. But when Charles goes to the store, he finds the police and the crime scene and learns that his wife was shot. At the hospital, back to the current time, we learn Nanette has no brain activity. Back at home, Charles retrieves the mail and reads about the robbery in the newspaper and all about the dead robber. As Charles obsesses over the murder and understanding the case, Andy tries to push him to make a decision regarding pulling the plug on Nanette because Andy's an asshole. It's worth noting, despite everything that's happened, we're only halfway through this movie. Charles leaves the police station and crashes into a police car. Then we see him finally decide to pull the plug on his wife, saying, "Let her go." We then see the funeral at the cemetery, where I feel compelled to point out there is a priest presiding, and yet he did not bring a children's choir with him to the funeral, as the movie Beetlejuice suggested was common. I'm sorry. I have no idea why I've currently got that movie and its questionable decisions on my mind.
I know. It came out as our video today.
Oh, did it?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know when it was coming out, so I was trying to be coy. After seeing Charles on the phone, frustrated with the police investigation, we jump back to Hank calling Andy to tell him the robbery went bad. After that call ended, and after they visited the hospital, we see Andy call Hank and demand a meetup, where he grills him about Bobby's involvement, and Hank hilariously leaves out the fact that Bobby's wife, was absolutely in the apartment and saw Hank and knew they were doing a heist. A crucial line of dialogue in this bar scene is Andy saying, if you had to take somebody out, why couldn't it have been him? Which hints that there might not be a great relationship with Dad. When Hank gets home, he has a message from the car rental agency saying he left some personal items in the car he had rented. He panics, calls them back, only to find out they're closed. And then he goes there the next morning to reclaim his personal items because he doesn't know what he left in the car. He thinks it might be a CD, but he doesn't have ID. At a bar later, he's approached by Bobby's girlfriend, wife, and her brother, Michael Shannon, who is not Zod, and they shake him down about the robbery and Bobby's death. Hank tries to claim he only rented the car for Bobby, but they're not buying it. This is a good time to remind you not to go into crime events with people who have wives or girlfriends or daughters, just FYI. Anyway, Bobby's widow's brother is a real hard ass and demands $10,000 for her bills or else. In a humiliating act, Hank goes to his ex to ask for a loan, and she laughs in his face and he says, tell our daughter I love her. And she says, if you loved her, you'd pay the child support. And I think she might be right. When he can't sleep, Hank pours way too many pills into his hands, seeming to consider suicide before immediately putting the pills back in the bottle. Hank then later goes back to the car rental place to get the CD, has no ID, but they will take his credit card as proof of his ID. He shows them a credit card with his name on it. I guess that's, you got the card. You must be him.
I mean, to me, it was like you called the person about a personal item, which just happens to be a CD. Just give him the CD already. Like I didn't even know why we needed to go through all that.
Yeah, I don't either. Andy calls Hank. We cut back to the day of the robbery from Andy's perspective and hear a voicemail about the auditors coming in on Monday, which is tomorrow as we stand, maybe. Andy then brings tea to his father along with a slice of cold pizza and asks if he's given any thought to the stone, meaning his mother's headstone. Checking his voicemail, Andy learns the auditors say there are 2 terminated employees who are still drawing checks. And obviously that's Andy doing malfeasance, but goddamn, how much does he spend on cocaine and heroin? Andy then goes back to the skyscraper of sin, but is turned away because he does not have an appointment. He smokes a cigarette outside, sweats a bit, and then gets let into the apartment because kimono guy throws a towel at him and says, next time, make an appointment. And I think there's a whole documentary in here about these high-end concierge drug penthouses that I didn't know existed. Then, arguing with his brother about why was there a gun, why are you so stupid, Andy asserts his dominance over Hank and says, are you going to get tough? Are you going to hurt me? I should fucking kill you, he says. We then cut to after the funeral at the house where Charles and Andy talk out back. And there's a really interesting framing here after Charles sits down where we can see Gina inside the kitchen in the window between the two men who are outside. There's a lot of interesting shots in camera work in this movie, but that was the one that stood out to me the most. And in this scene, Charles apologizes for not being the father Andy needed and for not being good at emotions. He confesses that he pushed Andy so hard because he wanted Andy to be better than he had been. He says, it might not mean anything, but I do love you, and I'm sorry. And this is where the movie, to me, becomes all about this relationship and not really about the heist. And so many sons would love to hear their fathers say this to them. But it just comes too late for Andy to be able to accept it. So he expresses anger that his dad liked his brother better and gave Hank affection. And then he says, are you even sure I'm your son? Before Charles abruptly slaps him in the face pretty darn hard. Then in the car, immediately afterwards with Gina, Andy breaks down crying and pulls the car over and goes on an emotional rant about how unfair it is that his dad thinks he can just apologize and wipe away everything that had ever happened between them. It's powerful and relatable, and Gina tries to talk to him, but then he just shuts down again and drives off. We next see him leaving the house for vague reasons, and Gina asks, what would you do if you came back and I wasn't here? And he coldly says, you got someplace to be? He goes to Hank's, but gets no response on the buzzer, and then returns home to find Gina has packed her bags and states her intention to leave. She even admits her affair with Hank, completely throwing Hank out of the bus. She also tells him the boss called and he's supposed to call right away and asks if he's in trouble. Hank barely reacts to any of this, and she's upset that he won't even get angry about her leaving, but he does give her some money for a cab. After she's gone, he angrily unmakes the bed and gently ransacks the bedroom before hitting the living room to dump out an entire huge bowl of decorated rocks one by one onto the glass coffee table. We see the phone is off the hook, and we cut to Charles in the car getting a busy signal before jumping to Charles' life before the robbery. No, it's not before the robbery. Sorry. He removes a gun from an envelope ominously, then gets in the car and goes to the same jewelry fence we saw Andy visit before, asking if he's heard anything about a recent robbery. They clearly know each other from the past. Before Charles, I guess, went straight with a jewelry store, he might have fenced some jewels with this guy. The fence shows Charles Andy's business card, and Charles is rocked, falling to the ground. Next, we see Hank call Andy and tell him about Bobby's girl and her brother and the blackmail. Andy promises to figure something out and immediately lays down to take a nap, only to pop up suddenly, check his passport, and start to pack a bag. Outside, he waves down a cab, and we see that Charles is now stalking and following his son, Andy. Andy goes to his office, grabs some stuff, and largely ignores a woman there, telling him that she's going to have to tell the bosses he's been by. He then visits a travel agent, and then he goes to Hank's. His plan is to go to the blackmailer's house and maybe pay him, maybe not. And again, I love the camera work in this scene because we get two alternating handheld kind of slow zooms on each character, Hank on the left and Andy on the right. And it really emphasizes the back and forth and the power dynamic. They hop in a cab. Charles is still following. Before they can go to the blackmailers, though, they go to the Heroin Hotel. Andy bum rushes the kimono guy because he is now finally desperate enough to rob the drug dealer. Hank stops Andy from beating Kimono to death. They go into the back room and find a drugged out man who Andy immediately kills. Then they rob Kimono's safe, which turns out to have been a Chekhov safe all along. Kimono shows up, and then Andy kills him. Hank is shocked, and Andy just keeps yelling, "Did you touch anything?" Honestly, if they'd been okay with murder all along, this was a much better robbery idea than the jewelry heist, if you ask me. Next, they go to Bobby's apartment to meet the girl and the blackmailer. Charles is still following them. Hank gives the money to the blackmailer, but then Andy pulls a gun and asks how they can know he won't just keep blackmailing them. The girl comes in the room and spies a gun in the pizza box before Andy shoots the blackmailer. Hank tells him no more deaths. He hears the little girl crying in the other room. He doesn't want Andy to shoot the girlfriend. So Andy turns the gun on Hank and tells him, I know. Hank apologizes and encourages Andy to pull the trigger. But before he can, and I think he was going to, the girl shoots Andy and tells Hank to get the hell out of here. So Hank drops some cash from the bag for her and leaves in a panic. Charles calls out to him, but Hank doesn't hear. So Charles drives off after him, only to get completely blocked in by police who are arriving in response to the gunshots and the girl's 911 call. And they're here way too soon, if you ask me, but it's a movie, so I will let it go. Charles watches Andy wheeled by on a gurney and loaded into an ambulance and appears to lose some of his anger at Andy. He goes to the hospital to visit, and Andy immediately apologizes and says he just needed money. There wasn't supposed to be any gun, and Mom wasn't supposed to be working. Charles puts his hand on Andy's forehead and tells him it's okay. He puts on his glasses and looks at the heart monitor, turning it off and then back on. And then he walks into the hall and says, the monitor turned it off somehow. And she said, oh, it's common, just reset it. And now it's probably when you start to feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up a little bit as you realize that Charles was maybe testing to see what would happen if the monitor was turned off. And he goes in and attaches all of Andy's wires to himself so the monitor will keep working. And then he grabs a pillow and he smothers Andy to death. Andy tries to fight back, saying, Dad. And that is some premeditated shit that Charles should go away forever for, but he merely replaces the sensors in the air tube and goes into the hall, panicking about his son's heart stopping, and walks away as the medical professionals race into the room. And I think it's worth talking about how this man is evil and was likely an evil father who raised one evil son and one stupid one and brought all this on himself. Brokenness begets brokenness. I also think it's fair to compare Andy's apology at the end and Charles' lack of acceptance to Charles' apology earlier in the movie and Andy's lack of acceptance, as though an apology can wipe away all the harm done. And that is Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. Boys, what do we think?
A few things before I get into this, or a few things. I believe he doesn't have an ID to go back when he goes back to the rent-a-car place because Michael Shannon takes it from him.
Oh, okay.
That's the reason why he doesn't have it. The part where you were like, you said that they're murdering people at the end, and why don't we just do that in the first place? I don't think his urge to murder happens until after he has had his scene with his dad, and that and then he's going to get left by Marissa Tomei. So I don't think anybody's in that headspace until
I was only joking. I wasn't trying to say they actually should have done that heist. I was just, so now that we're okay with murder, maybe we should have this place to begin with.
Yeah. I just wanted to make that clear. And then what was the other thing? What was the other thing? Oh my gosh, Aaron, just go ahead and start talking. I'll remember.
Sure. This movie falls into a category. There are a few movies in this category for me of stone cold masterpieces that just aren't for me. Seven is another one of these movies. And there are a few of them, and I'll talk about why. But I do want to say right from the beginning, this is an incredible film, just on so many levels, and we'll get more into specifics, I'm sure. But for me, there's a distinguishing thing between the destination and the journey in movies sometimes that I find myself getting distracted by. I think the destination in this movie is it's hard for me to come away at the end and go, that is a movie that I think speaks truth to something in my world. Like, my worldview is so opposed to like nihilism and those kind of things that I come away from it with the themes and the messages just going, nah, just not true. Kind of like if you watch a movie and you're just like, well, that didn't really happen, so it's harder for me to invest in it. It's a form of that, and I realize this is all, by the way, completely subjective and viewer based. But I think that's part of it. And again, I'm still trying to put my finger on this stuff having watched movies for 45 years now or whatever since I was a kid, like trying to figure out why I like certain things, why I don't. The journey is a simple journey. Honestly, this movie isn't really that complicated, but the performances and the filmmaking techniques elevate it to this really interesting story because of the way we're doled out information in this movie. It really keeps us invested in the right questions, right? The right storytelling questions. So we get the exact answers we need when we need them, to never feel like we're confused or we're annoyed. And that is a tough magic trick to pull. And the nonlinear stuff here, I think, works really, really well. The second reason it works so well is named Philip Seymour Hoffman. He is astonishing in this movie. And by the way, the other performances in this movie are great. Like Ethan Hawke is always great. Yeah. But Philip Seymour Hoffman is blowing my mind in this movie. And I've seen him do great performances before. And I think that is definitely noteworthy. I mean, 3, 4, maybe 5 bravura performance scenes in this movie from him where you're just like, wow, you only needed one of those for the Oscar reel, Philip. Like, you didn't have to go so hard. But I'm glad you did. And so yes, I think it is absolutely a stone cold masterpiece of filmmaking. I think this movie, if I'm understanding it correct, or what I'm taking from it, for my own personal narrative, is about the Albert Finney character. It's about Charles. It's about the father in many ways. We end on a picture of the father walking through the hallway, right? And it goes white, and that's kind of the end of the movie. Yep. Like, he is in many ways symbolically passing on to a new life in some ways. Like, there's this kind of, light at the end of the tunnel aspect to the way that's shot. The central scene, in my opinion, is his scene with the fence, with the diamond fence, and the things that guy says to him about, oh, you thought it was so easy to determine who was good and who was bad and what morals were, and it's so easy for you to look down on me and the decisions I made. Well, look at this business card, buddy. Guess what? Your world just crumbled. And you know what? The movie says his world did just crumble. And the fact that his world crumbles and then he makes the premeditated decision he makes at the end of the movie is, I think, a really clear statement that this movie is making about, is there good in the world? And I think the movie would say no, probably not. And so, like, that to me is that destination part that's, that makes the movie overall one that I go, did I like it? I don't know. It's not saying some things that really, go along with how I see the world, but it is a stone cold masterpiece. So, but again, I put it in category with movies like Seven, which is obviously one of the best movies ever made. Like, there are just these movies that I put a little asterisk on, a very personal, subjective asterisk on. So,
is it because of human nature's ability to be that kind of evil, or what is it?
It's more that the movie seems to indicate that is the majority, or that is, like, it feels to me oftentimes that there are movies that indicate, because the movie is very specific about his world crashing and his worldview being wrong.
I would say Seven does that. Seven clearly does that, because there's nothing good in that world whatsoever.
Right. Yeah.
And even in the small things of Seven, you can see that everybody's kind of just checked out, and they're gonna, I don't know. This one seems to be very located on this family more than everybody else. Although, yes, everybody they run into is a piece of shit. so I mean, it felt very located on this family to me, whereas Seven builds a world that says everybody's fucked.
And the other piece I would add, just saw this movie yesterday for the first time. I've had 24 hours to ruminate on this. Like, I may come back next week and go, you know what? I was totally wrong the more I think about this. I love this movie completely. I don't know, but I'm just speaking to the current cognitive dissonance I have with a film like this that is, again, clearly a stone cold masterpiece.
It doesn't give you very many people to root for. I mean, Rosemary Harris is a fine person in this movie from what we see. The daughter and Amy Ryan gives him a hard time, but I think we can extract that is probably more than 50% his fault that she is in the situation she's in, and so maybe I could root for Amy Ryan's character, but almost everybody else, I got big question marks about their decisions and their life choices. It's hard for me to root for any of them.
And I do like to draw the distinction too, because I will hear people say, "Oh, the movie didn't have anybody to root for." That's not exactly what I'm saying, because there are plenty of movies I like that don't have anybody to root for.
Sure.
There are plenty of movies with anti-heroes that I enjoy. There's just something about an overall worldview part that gives me that cognitive dissonance, again, that I'm still processing. So
I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think all the decisions make sense when you talk about people who are not versed in crime going into something that they think is going to be super easy. It's going to just be like, Andy sits there and thinks, "Oh, all I have to do is get my stupid brother to go in and knock off this jewelry store that we know very well." And everything, even though while he's telling him all this, he's calling him a pussy and all this other type of stuff, you don't have the balls and all that. And then he really doesn't. He really doesn't. He expects this guy to go in and do all this stuff, but at the same time, he doesn't want to have everything come down on him. So he thinks that, maybe this guy's desperate enough finally, because he's paying all this child support and everything, that he'll actually do this. It's so easy. Just go in and smash and grab, and, and our parents get the insurance money. What could go wrong is basically what it is. But then Hank goes and gets a buddy of his that fucks everything up. I mean, it's a series. It's a series of innocuous decisions that turn into really bad decisions by the end of it. It's not plan A. Nothing we see in here is plan A. It's gets further down and further down. So I do agree with the way this is, because I think this is how people who are not versed in knocking off jewelry stores would do it and mess it up and everything, and be so panicked that they left a CD in a rental-car like that was going to do anything, and spend a whole bunch of time on it. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, as far as the synopsis was concerned, was that Andy definitely needs drug money. There's no doubt about it. That's like, he's going to some very high-end place there. That apartment that dude lives in is probably, I can't even venture to guess how much money a month that huge place in Manhattan is. You're talking probably six figures a month at least. To be able to afford that, and to have, basically just to have a nice place where you can just lie down and get injected by someone else. The cost has got to be astronomical. But how he's been funding this the whole time is that he has there's two employees that don't work at his place anymore, and he's been drawing checks from them, and the business is getting audited. So that's the reason why he needs the money right now, is because they're getting audited, and that's going to be discovered, and he's going to get fired and all that. So like, that was one thing that I wanted to make clear on all this. I think it's interesting, all the different decisions, these little things that keep building up to a big, huge thing. And that's one of the things I love about this movie, is just the fact that innocuous things start to snowball very quickly, and I just, I love how this movie's told. I love that flashback feature when they're zooming in on people, and it's and it goes to the next thing. You can't come out of this movie without saying Philip Seymour Hoffman, right? This is what Aaron was talking about, and the scene in which he's in the car and he's saying it's not fair and all that type of thing. I watched this scene, I immediately paused the movie for a moment, and I went to and one of the first things on the IMDb trivia was Sidney Lumet said this was the best acting he's ever run across in his life. And you're talking about Sidney Lumet, who's made 1 million movies with all the best actors in the world. And he thought this was the best performance he had ever seen, is that one in the car. Cause that's just a person breaking down, in a very just a tremendous way. I don't know what you got to do to get into that kind of mindset, but Philip Seymour Hoffman does basically just run away with this movie, in a movie filled with great actors and everything. it's kind of I got to listen to I got the Blu-ray of this, and I got to listen to Sidney Lumet and Philip Seymour Hoffman and Ethan Hawke talk about
awesome.
this movie on the commentary. That is well worth getting a Blu-ray if you ever want to see this, own this movie or whatever. But they get through all the little nuts and bolts and talking about how Sidney Lumet setting up these shots, a lot of the shots that you guys were talking about in this, and they were remarking how great some of these shots were, and Sidney Lumet's like, yeah, I kind of like this. This is I don't want to pat myself on the back or anything, but this is my favorite shot. Like the shot where it's zooming in on Albert Finney and the whole family's there, and he decides to pull the plug. That's the one that they're talking. He was like, oh yeah, I hate to pat myself on the back, but this is my favorite shot of the movie. Yeah, really good shot. It is kind of I don't know. It's kind of sad watching Philip Seymour Hoffman's character in this because of the drug thing. This is exactly how he died, I believe. Not necessarily in a beautiful Manhattan apartment where they're furnishing this type of thing, but that was rough watching him go into that room and get injected with the drugs, and then basically all that. So that was a one sobering thing. I don't mean to, that was not a pun intended, but that was a thing that I saw that I was I was like, oh my God, they had no idea. This is one of those things that plays completely differently after you know what's happened. But anyway, yes, love this movie. I'm so glad you picked it. I had not seen it since it was in theaters, so very happy to have revisited this. So all right, let's go on to our super secret double feature. Aaron, what do you got?
Yeah, I went with Place Beyond the Pines.
Forever.
Yeah, I remember feeling similar with this movie in the way that it handles telling the story, giving you information at different parts of what's going on, the way it plays throughout time with these individuals and who they are, the way it deals with people trying to crime and things messing up, and the way it deals with family relationships, all seem to be consistent themes in this movie. And yeah, I personally think this movie has a little more hope to it, but and so maybe that's why I like it more. I don't know, but it definitely deals with a lot of the same things. And I think Gosling and Cooper and Eva Mendes are all great in it as well. So I definitely think this one's worth a watch if you haven't seen it, and worth a revisit if you have.
Man, yeah, I was working at Hollywood 27 when this movie came out, and I haven't seen it since. So
I only saw it once, but I remember liking it.
Is this where Ryan Gosling and Eva Mendes met?
I think so.
Or had they already gotten married by this point? I don't know.
I don't know.
All right, so I had a couple. I'm going to name a couple that are not my super secret double feature right off the bat. The first one that really occurred to me was Fargo. And this has to do with not only the story here, where you have William H. Macy is planning a fake kidnapping of his wife, and he hires two people to do it, and everything gets screwed up. I mean, the stories really do kind of like have a lot in common. Like a guy who thinks something's going to be simple to get money ends up making decisions that screw everything up, and it's another snowballing movie. And again, pun not intended. I'm not trying to be Dicer here. Snowball, Fargo. But the Carter Burwell score really kind of, I feel like Lumet had to have been, after watching Fargo, said, I'm gonna hire this guy for this particular movie that has similar themes to it and everything. So all the way through, the score is like got those hints of Fargo in it all the way through. Like this is Carter Burwell and his crime movie, pastiche or whatever you want to call it. And then I also thought of To Die For, which was Nicole Kidman movie. It also has some. I guess like some feel, a feel like this movie a little bit in places. But we're gonna do a Philip Seymour Hoffman double feature here. I have Owning Mahoney as
Nice.
the super secret double feature. In this movie, Philip Seymour Hoffman is stealing from his company, just like he is in this movie, and he uses this money to gamble, and he gambles to a crazy amount. Like you see him right at the beginning calling his bookie and saying, I want to take all the home teams during the day and I want to take all the away teams at night. No thought put into any of that stuff. But his real vice is going to the United States, because it's based in Canada, going to the United States and going to a casino and playing craps, and that's where he really gets addicted to his gambling and everything. And the casino owner is John Hurt, and it's really good. But I feel like if you want to see two back-to-back Philip Seymour Hoffman performances that are just there's a scene in Owning Mahoney where he's bowling, and he's like, he doesn't want to be there. He wants to do craps. He wants to gamble and all this other stuff, but he's giving it the college try, man. He bowls, he throws the ball down the lane, and it goes in the gutter, and he's like, and he turns around and he's like, and like, basically you can tell that, I'm trying, I'm showing that I love this, but I get to get out of here right now. Basically he leaves bowling right after that. So It's just a thing that I love. Philip Seymour Hoffman is always just great in everything. And I don't know if anybody's seen this movie. This is hard to find sometimes, but I think
I've seen it. I loved it. That's a great double feature. I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Next week it's Aaron's turn. Aaron, what is the homework for next week?
Well, I decided to think in terms of master directors with a story about somebody being chased. That seems to fit the theme of the two movies. If you stretch, Devil Knows You're Dead. So I went with North by Northwest, Hitchcock's absolute masterpiece.
Banger.
Yeah. This is in my top 5 favorite movies of all time, consistently in my top 3. And it is my favorite Hitchcock movie, and I think it's time.
Yeah. Talk about scores, man. This is another good score too. Yeah. Bernard Herrmann, can't beat that guy.
Man.
All right. Well, I can't wait to see this. Even though I've seen it probably 15 times, I can't wait to see it again. This is as good a movie as it gets here. So anyway, where all did you say that was playing? Did we say?
My Googling said it had to be rented, but the chat is saying Criterion Channel.
Okay. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week. Once again, chat, thank you so much for coming out. Appreciate it. Just love it when you guys are like talking all the way through. It gives me something to do while I'm, listening to the synopsis and stuff like that. I love that type of thing. So anyway, thank you guys for coming out. Next week is North by Northwest. We'll see you next time. See ya.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Goodbye.